the collective damage and impact, particularly on people in poverty or struggling at the edges of poverty, will be in all of the communities in the mainland of our country, but also in the Caribbean, our own part of our own country, in the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. What that all will be, and it looks like it's devastating for many people. In fact, as we know from history, that group of people will most likely be the most disproportionately affected, since they have throughout history, by most natural and human-caused disasters, been impacted more than anyone else, in large part because their living conditions are the most unstable and vulnerable, and that they live mostly in the environments most affected by these disasters. And it turns out that the population that we serve also support the carbon footprint reduction goals in significant numbers and want to contribute to clean energy transformation if they could afford to. In fact, a study was done that indicated that those with incomes below $25,000 are the most supportive demographic of Vermont's comprehensive energy plan. But, there's always a but, right? In the short term, that population will also be the most disproportionately burdened by some of the strategies we're talking about if we don't proactively work to mitigate those potential impacts. And that's because that population of people with low incomes already suffer with the highest energy burden of any group, which is unbearable for many of them. And the lower their income, the higher the percentage of income that's needed for them to stay warm and fuel their cars. A few statistics about that. In 2015, the households in the lowest income quintile spent 22% of their after-tax income, which is an average of $11,150, on home utilities and gasoline, while households in the two lowest quintiles combined, an average of $19,700 in average take-home income, spend 17% of their income, their after-tax income, compared with 5% for households in the top quintile. With home heating, Vermonters with incomes below 50% of the federal poverty level, which is about 13,000 of them in our state, paid an estimated 46%, I'll say it again, 46% of their income on home heating costs in 2016. And households between 50% of the federal poverty level and the poverty level, another 17,000 households, paid an average of 25% of their income. On average, households below 200% of the federal poverty level, which is the threshold for many of our assistance programs, paid an estimated $2,000 plus more than they could afford by most measures that evaluate that. In terms of gas, for automobiles, lower income households spend twice the percentage of their income, 16%, on transportation costs, 60% of which was on gas, than high income households do. 1 in 5 Vermonters live in what's referred to as fuel poverty, spending above 10% of their income on energy costs, and the number living in fuel poverty has grown 75% in Vermont since 2000. One of the problems is that low-income households are almost never able to take advantage of the latest, most effective approaches to reducing energy use and cutting their costs, such as high-efficiency furnaces, renewable technologies, electric or hybrid vehicles, etc., because they don't have the money to invest in them, to pay for the upfront costs, or to significantly benefit from the tax credits that are when they're offered. So low-income Vermont residents, while they want to be part of the solution, the longer-term solution to our carbon footprint and climate change, will also feel the worst impacts from some of the strategies to remedy that, unless the potentially regressive effects of those strategies are adequately mitigated by a number of things related to discounts and/or rebates that have the following qualities to them: that they're sufficient to overcome that income and cost disadvantage, that they're income sensitive, that they have, in other words, a sliding scale of impact, where the biggest mitigation is at the lowest income levels and scales down as you go up the income range. That they're provided to people in real time or shortly thereafter, not just an annual tax deduction or tax credit. The people paying more for gasoline and home heating fuel throughout the year can't wait till they do their taxes, if in fact they do their taxes, and not all of them do. That it's easy to obtain, that it's stigma-free, and that we can do it through means that everybody understands and uses, such as discount cards, like the electronic benefit transfer cards, the EBT cards that we use now for what used to be food stamps or WIC or other kinds of programs. Other concerns include that we have in the Community Action Network are that the cost-benefit ratio of the real or perceived level of sacrifice of these measures for carbon pricing or carbon pollution tax or other strategies versus the significance of that impact for just Vermont to implement rather than our nation as a whole need to really be examined carefully. And we need to look at strategies that will cross that threshold to have an impact and certainly a perceived impact by the people who are our Vermont residents who are making that sacrifice, or at least perceived to be making that sacrifice in the form of higher fuel costs that they're paying every time they go to the pump or order fuel for their heating system at home. That, of course, we have to deal with the question of whether there will be a significant economic disadvantage compared to adjacent states that we look at with all kinds of tax and other pricing issues. And we want to make sure that we are knowledgeable about and able to respond to the potential unintended political consequences of having good, progressive elected officials getting hurt on the third rail of perceived massive tax increases on what's perceived as a basic need. That doesn't mean we should shy away from the issue. It means we have to proactively understand how it's going to be received by the public and come up with strategies that enable those elected officials to overcome some of those perceptions. So in summary, given all of the above, the Vermont Community Action Agencies and many of the people that we represent and serve in our households all throughout Vermont that are struggling to make ends meet, that are trying to get themselves out of poverty or keep their families from getting pulled into poverty, have mixed feelings on support of some of these carbon pricing strategies. And the mixed feelings are contingent on the extent to which the mitigated and revenue used to support the efficiency in renewables is really taken into account. And to the extent to which the impact on our population is fair and balanced and not just falling on the shoulders in a disproportionate way on one segment of that population. In our case, as we're perceiving it, the people with the least ability to support that burden on their shoulders. That we want to be, and have been and want to continue to be as community action agencies and our statewide network, to be engaged in helping to develop acceptable approaches to developing that mitigation and thereby enabling broad-based support within the state. And so we see our role as continuing to support these efforts while at the same time helping to determine the strategies that will adequately mitigate the impact on already overburdened low-income Vermonters, and by doing that, make sure that everybody's on board and moving together forward to support and make these policies a reality and a success for all of us in Vermont. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Steve. Next up is Michael Knapp, and I just want to say a few words about Michael before I give him the microphone. He runs Green River Software, located right down here in downtown Brattleboro, a longtime member of Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility. And what I really appreciate about Michael's approach to business is that the lens he sees his work through is not just how can businesses mitigate their impact on the environment, but how can businesses actually have a positive impact on the environment? So, Michael.
Thank you. I guess this, to me, it's kind of we're in a very strange time where I think when I grew up and went into the environmental field, I feel like I envisioned business as really the source of the problem. Here was this resource extractive, pollution producing mechanism that we as a society were building, and the role of government was to come in and add some good tax policies and regulations to kind of balance the ethics, the social justice, the compassion, the energy policies that we needed that would kind of steer business in the right direction. But you know, I found myself 20 years ago living in a state where I came here because, you know, heck, there's no billboards on our highways. It's absolutely beautiful. This is the place I wanted to go, and I knew I couldn't solve the world's garbage problem, but maybe I could produce a little less garbage living on my land. Maybe I could consume foods that were a little more local. So I could begin to internalize these values and try and live my life sort of more in harmony with what I was trying to create. And I think, you know, here we are 20 years later from that period of time where I think business is actually pulling us forward. And it's a remarkable change from what I expected being an entrepreneur, right? I created a business because I did want to address the world's environmental problems. I wanted to try and address some of the educational problems that I saw. I wanted to address some of the public health problems that I saw in some small way. And I really focused my business on that right from the start. And frankly, being in Vermont was a unique opportunity because this was already happening in sustainable agriculture, right? The Ben and Jerry's of the world had kind of led the way. We saw seventh generation, that sort of deep green consumer movement coming out of our state. Frankly, we've had politicians come out of our state that are taking our country and the world by storm in ways that were very aligned with what I wanted to do. So it actually became pretty easy to take companies out of Seattle, Washington, D.C., Amsterdam, etc., and make the case that companies that wanted to focus on environmental protection came from Vermont in the United States, that you know, that's where it belongs. And we've grown to where we're now certifying about arguably 15-20% of the world's coffee production coming out of our little company here in Brattleboro. So we have 20 people, graduates of Brattleboro High School and others, folks that are moving here from Worcester and so on, focusing on carbon impact in agriculture. We're also doing about a third of the world's commercial real estate in terms of carbon and other environment, social, and governance disclosures from real estate investments to investors. And it's fascinating to me. I actually think investors care about this issue more because the hotel chain that swaps the light bulbs for the more efficient bulbs is better managed and going to have better returns, not necessarily because of the energy savings that it represents, but because of the management quality that that's a surrogate for. So our values here in carbon reduction and environmental protection align with investors around the world. So we're seeing a movement where I think business is leading the way, but now it's time for our state government to seize an opportunity that is sort of been left behind for us, right? Is let's get carbon policy right in this state, and we will see businesses the likes of which we can't even begin to imagine emerging here and nowhere else. And that's kind of, you know, the last thing I want to say, because I see Alex Wilson in the back of the room, and I gotta pick on him because, you know, for me, this all started from my one cold call, which was in my business was my sister's an architect. She works in Philly. She got this environmental building newsletter back in the early 2000s. looked in the back and saw that that the company that was writing it was in Vermont, and wrote me to say there were other people who were crazy like me who lived in my own town, and did I know that? And it was, sort of wearing them out to say, I gotta work with you, I gotta work with you, I gotta work with you. That finally got my company its start in green building, and now Alex and others are working on an Ecovation hub to say, hey, green building, which is responsible arguably for 20 to 40% of carbon emissions, not the green building, but the built environment. That there's an industry emerging here in high performance building, and the knowledge around that, in environmental building, however you define it, that really does belong right here in this region. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think we can take what's a horrific social problem and create an economic opportunity that's unparalleled and that's really ours to seize. So I just want to thank all the legislators that are working on this and the organizations to say, we're here as a business community to support this effort completely.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate those comments. And the reason Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility works on issues like carbon pricing is because we have members telling us that this is important to them and it's important to their bottom line as a business. I also want to note that there's been a lot of conversation so far tonight around carbon pricing. It's an incredibly important policy, and perhaps one of the biggest things Vermont can do to move the state away from fossil fuels. But we really wanted to have a discussion on all the options that could be on the table. So when you submit your questions in the 3x5 cards, don't feel you're boxed in on one policy issue. Really want to have a conversation about all the possible policy issues to combat climate change. I want to next turn the microphone over to Representative Sarah Copeland-Hanzas, who will talk about the legislative strategy here in tackling climate change.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming out to talk tonight. Some of you may be wondering, why is a legislator from Bradford all the way down here in Brattleboro to talk about the climate economy? To explain that to you, I have to tell you a couple of kind of quick stories about how I got to be one of the people who's passionate about pushing conversations around climate action. I grew up in Bradford, which is about 90 miles north of here, and right on the Connecticut River. I went to high school at Oxbow High School, and one of the unique offerings that public high school had was a ninth grade earth science class called the New England Landscape. And it was basically a field trip based earth science class that took students out into the out of doors and helped us learn about our natural environment by experiencing it firsthand. And when I was in high school in the mid-1980s, one of the biggest issues, the biggest conundrums in terms of the climate, in terms of the environment, was the issues around acid rain. And so we were seeing the damaging effects on the ridge tops that we were hiking as 14 and 15-year-olds, these effects coming from smokestacks in the Midwest. And the concern at the time was, this is ruining our environment. It has the possibility of having cascading effects down the streams and into the rivers and affecting the entire ecology of New England. And we have very little that we can do as individuals in Vermont to impact that. And I tell this story because it has been one of those success stories. We are no longer worried about acid rain causing deforestation on our mountaintops because we, as a society, decided that it was important to make sure that the smokestacks in the Midwest were not sending up excess pollution. And it is a success story that when I was 14 seemed unsolvable. So the other reason why I'm here and why I'm passionate about talking about the climate economy, before and for the first 5 years that I was in the legislature, I was a stay-at-home mom. And I had 3 little kids, and I was the Little League coach, and I volunteered, for their field trips, and I did that whole thing where you basically impoverish yourself for a decade in the interest of being able to be there for your kids and for their classmates. And one of the necessities when you're carting around a whole bunch of little kids is to drive a car that gets really terrible gas mileage, the minivan. And so as soon as I could envision a way to get myself into a more fuel-efficient vehicle, I did get myself into a more fuel-efficient vehicle because I knew that my family was very vulnerable not only to the 500 gallons of heating oil that we had to figure out how to pay for in November right after our property taxes were due and right before we needed to buy Christmas gifts for the little ones, but that weekly or sometimes multiple times a week fill up of the fuel tank was a huge expense for our family. And it was one that left us feeling very vulnerable. And so the Cash for Clunkers program, if you all remember that, was a tremendous opportunity for folks to trade in their old, less efficient vehicle for a more efficient vehicle. And that got me started thinking about actually doing the math on what does it cost my family to drive the miles that we drive with the miles per gallon that we have. And that got me started doing some very simple math that led to what I have to say is a very liberating experience of having a car that cost me $25. Well, a couple weeks ago it cost me $25 to fill it up, and it would last me the whole week. Then Harvey came along, and so we'll see if we get back down to those lower gas prices. But you know, I tell that story to point out that sometimes it's just that little spark of something that asks you to think, do I need to continue to spend $40 or $50 or $60 every time I fill up my tank? Could I imagine a different kind of vehicle or a different way of getting around? And so as a legislator, I have spent most of my 14 years in the legislature on the healthcare committee, and that's a whole different topic that I would love to chat with you about. But I'm also really concerned about helping Vermonters and helping those citizen legislators who come to Montpelier really understand that it is possible to reset this conversation. It is possible to take a step back and say, what more could we be doing to make a positive impact on our carbon footprint as a state and as individuals and as businesses, and what could we do as policymakers to help Vermonters reset that conversation so that we can at some point envision a future where we're not exporting $2 billion a year out of Vermonters' pockets, out of our household budgets, out of our business budgets, out of our state and municipal budgets. $2 billion a year goes out of the state for the fossil fuel purchases that we make in order to, primarily to transport, but also to heat our homes and our businesses. We can imagine a different way, and we can incentivize families and businesses to switch over to cleaner forms of energy. And we can liberate ourselves from that $2 billion a year tax that we're paying right now, because by and large, we have the ability to generate clean electricity energy very close to home. And as was said earlier, it actually creates a lot of jobs. It incentivizes the weatherization programs that we know people need to do in order to become more independent. And I think it's, I appreciated what Michael said about internalizing values, because I think we as a state we care about each other, we care about our environment. It is one of the main reasons why we all live here. And we can continue to have the conversation about how to reduce the use of carbon and free all of us from the burden of that cost.
Thank you very much, Representative Copeland-Hanzis. And now we'll have a few comments from Representative David Dean. And soon after that, we'll move into our question and answer portion of the evening, when I have a list of questions that have been submitted already. I'll be getting the index cards soon, and we'll pose some of these questions to our esteemed panelists.
Good, thank you. Um, some of the topics are you'll wonder why I jump between them the way I do. Just take my word for it, it makes sense up here. Hopefully I won't get you lost. There's a term in economics that goes something like myopic view. That people take a myopic view of very long-term trends in economic activity, and because of that myopic view, meaning that it's got to be close to you, it has to be immediate, and whatever, people in fact make uninformed decisions. So that by ignoring that long-term thing that is happening, that is out there, that is going forward, it's actually measurable, but it's not immediate, you are actually doing yourself a disservice. That's the economics view. And for me, that fits really well with the whole notion of what's been happening with carbon pollution. There are people out there warning, but guess what? It's not flooding in my backyard, etc. Of course, the recent news, and if you think back to water year 2011 here in the state of Vermont, ought to convince people that, yeah, it's right here, it's in my backyard. How bad could climate change be? What might be the ultimate effect? And I want to take you back in geologic history a little way to the Permian mass extinction. Of the 5 great die-offs in the last 500 million years on the Earth, only one was caused by climate change, and that's the Permian mass extinction. It occurred 248 million years ago. 96% of all the species on the face of the Earth died in that die-off. So if you want to think about how bad could it get, think about 96%, and I presume we would be one of the 96%, since we're not very capable of existing without civilization around us. The other thing that, and I've been at trying to get a fee, tax, or whatever applied to carbon for 4 years. First time I introduced the bill, and of course got absolutely savaged by more conservative voices for doing so. But one of the things that I have been working on has left us in a position where Vermont does not have to go it alone. I have been working since a national conference sponsored by the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators 3 years ago to put together a working group of legislators throughout New England, and including the state of New York. And we have been meeting, albeit not every month or something like that, but we've been meeting on a regular basis, about quarterly. Our next meeting's in October. Sarah has been active in that group, as well as other members of the Vermont legislature. We have done some things together as sort of a coalition of legislators. Carbon pricing bill was introduced in the Connecticut legislature. We held one of our quarterly meetings on the day that it was introduced, held a press conference outside the House chamber, went in, and several of us testified in front of the Connecticut House Natural Resources Committee, who was having the first hearing on the bill. And it gave us, meaning those by us, I mean the advocates for carbon pricing, a forum and some exposure. We were going to try and do it again down in Rhode Island, but everybody has a real life, and we couldn't quite pull it off. But the bill has been introduced, it has had its first hearing, and it's underway in the Rhode Island legislature. The one other thing that the regional group is prepared to do is coordinate a press event in each of the state houses in early January as a climate change carbon pricing bill is introduced into that legislative body. Again, just so that we can educate the public and make it clear that we're not alone in this, that there are other jurisdictions, be they states or municipalities, cities, who are in fact concerned. One of the other things that I've been finding in my readings lately is that Vermont's late to the party again. As most of you know, I'm a river guy and worked in New Hampshire and Vermont. Vermont has this image of itself as being shiny green and whatever. New Hampshire beats us all the time in terms of water control. And what I'm finding is that internationally, 1,200 of some of the largest companies in the world are now doing carbon pricing as they are doing their economic planning for the future. And what does that look like? I'll use one example, and this one will maybe shock you a little bit. Shell oil. $40 a ton of carbon emissions is what they build into their economic planning for the future. And what does that mean? Well, they put aside that $40 for every ton of their activity that's going to release carbon into the air. Where does it go? It goes to organizations like the 8-state Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative that incorporates the state of Vermont and all of the New England states. That's how Vermont and other states that have low carbon emissions actually get paid for having that low carbon emission, and it reduces your electric bill. I am so glad that Molly is involved and working on this. Again, it seems like an unrelated fact, but it's been touched on. 47% of Vermont's carbon footprint comes from the transportation sector. Okay? We don't have any plans on the drawing board at this point that I'm aware of that will deal with that transportation sector. So having her deep involved with the transportation committee, whatever, potentially she will provide leadership that we will all gladly follow. And now I have two asks for the people here this evening. First off, my understanding of part of the reason for this was to engage you in advising us, not necessarily what we should be doing. We all know that we want to reduce our carbon emissions, but how do we do that? How do we reach out to people who Steve represents and get them engaged with an assurance that, yes, we will address your concerns, but you got to help us bring this forward. You got to help us make this happen. As I said, we've already got the business community, both here in Vermont and international. But how do we get the political will in the general population? And so advice this evening would be much appreciated, at least for me. And then my second ask is, when I go outside of Vermont to fish or outside New England to fish, there are two places that I go. One is the Gulf Coast of Texas, chase around redfish. I fish out of a community called Rockport. Rockport is where Harvey came ashore. It flattened the community. The other place I go in off years, or are the Keys, Marathon, where Irma came ashore. Community is flattened. I also have a very good friend who lives on the west coast of Florida. I've been in touch with her, and she's okay. But I want to ask those of you who can Send a donation to the Red Cross. Send a donation to the diaper fund. Send a donation to the air conditioning fund, whatever. Because those are our friends, if you will. Now, I have a personal connection, unfortunately, with both locations. I'm starting to think I'm a jinx, but I really want to make the request on behalf of the people that I know in those communities that have gotten hurt. So, with that, I will end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Dean. You know, I never in my life thought I'd be on the same side on a policy issue with the likes of Shell and ExxonMobil, but this is the brave new world that we live in now. So before we turn over to the Q&A portion, Representative Valerie Stewart is here and wanted to see if she wanted to give some introductory remarks about her support for taking action on climate change.
Thanks, Daniel. And there may have been some confusion. I was actually supposed to go down to Savannah and be in Savannah. That's okay. I have a loud voice. I can have a loud voice. I was supposed to be in Savannah at a Women in Government conference as of tomorrow, but the conference was canceled. I'm out some money for sure on both the hotel and the winter. But at any rate, what I would like to say is, from my vantage point, the way we can make this happen, some of it is exactly what happened in Burlington last week. So, what I would like to ask for a donation to is the Vermont Council on Rural Development. Any of you who know Paul Costello, he is a gift to Vermont. He makes things happen. I had a good idea. The good idea was that we should put Vermont on the map as a national and ultimately international leader, hopefully, in global climate change job creation. We already got there. In 2014, we created more jobs in the renewable energy sector than anywhere in the nation. We're talking 17,000 jobs in renewable energy. I just happen to be on the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee. Why am I on that committee? Because I think job creation, workforce development, and a number of these things are the way to help our people. Not be over here shooting up, not be over there on, needing a Narcan, etc. So I propose, an idea. I have a PR and marketing background. I worked in New York City for 14 years. I did communications. I helped companies, put companies on the map through the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, etc. So I just had this, idea at one of the things that Molly and I have been constant, attendees. I think he's had 3 of them. A number of you, Doug Cox, Michael Bosworth, Tad, Alex Wilson, a bunch of you in the room. I probably missed a bunch of people, but I can't really see because I don't have my prescription glasses on. But the long and the short of it is, the idea was just to do that. And so what did we have in Burlington? We had 500 people from all over. The majority of them were from Vermont, but many of them were from elsewhere, Colorado, somebody in town planning, and they're all trying to deal with what's happening. We see it all over the news. So my point is, from my vantage point, let's get real. Companies run the world, unfortunately. I won't get into that whole discussion, but I think by approaching this from a job creation, here's how we handle the problem, let's get positive, looks bleak out there, but let's get our people working, let's put Vermont on the map, let's be a leader. We are a leader, so let's go. So if you want to look it up, Catalyst for the Global Climate Change Economy is the name of the conference. We also toured sites, David Blittersdorf, NRG Systems, All Earth Renewables. These guys are fixing this now. We need to fix this now. All you have to do is turn on the news. We ain't done a good job, and we got to do better. Donate to the Vermont Council on Rural Development. Keep this going. Let's lead. Let's, solve this problem for the future of our grandkids and our kids. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Representative Stewart. And I want to mention that Representative Stewart is a valued member of the House Commerce Committee, which works on economic development issues. So she has a seat at the table in that body to affect these decisions. And she mentioned the number of Vermonters working in the clean energy sector. And what's also interesting is that since 2013, that number has grown almost 30%. So, in an era where we're seeing slow or stagnant economic growth in a lot of industries, this is an industry that is growing, is expanding, and is paying very good salaries. So now I'd like to turn over to the question and answer portion of the night. I have a list of questions that were submitted online. We'll get to some of the index cards soon too as well. And I will direct these questions to whoever I think is probably the best fit on the panel, but don't hesitate to raise your hand and let me know that you want to respond to that question. And also don't hesitate to let me know that maybe you aren't the right person to answer that question as well. So the first question, I think I'm going to give this to Steve Geller, is what can we do to expand access to renewable energy and weatherization for renters and low to middle income homes?
That's what I was going to ask you, Dan, actually. We did campaign in the legislature, not this past session, but the session before, during the year when the Weatherization Assistance Program for low-income households was sunsetting. And the legislature came through by not only stabilizing and one of the issues that we were concerned about was that because the weatherization program existed on the basis of the gross receipts tax, which is 0.5% on every dollar spent for certain over-the-road fuels of different kinds. The irony is that as fuel prices came down over the last couple of years, the revenue for weatherization also came down, and it jeopardized the integrity and the ability of the program to meet. We're not meeting anywhere near the level of the need, and we're part of the state plan to weatherize, I can't remember the number, 20,000 homes, 80,000 homes by 2020 originally. It was an incredibly ambitious state plan, and the weatherization programs had a small piece of that focused on the lowest income Vermonters. But every year, as fuel prices came down, much to our delight for the short-term benefit of the people we served, we were deeply more and more anxious about our ability to actually provide the program. And the legislature, through a number of different coalitions and dialogues, came through with the concept that we get rid of the gross receipts tax and instead base the revenue for the Weatherization Trust Fund, the Vermont portion of our weatherization funding, on dollars per gallon used. So although there is also the negative incentive that while weatherization and everything we do is trying to get people to use less energy, less fuel of all kinds, by doing that we're also risking shrinking the program, but not as severely and not as volatilely as the dependence on the price of the fuel was doing. So it stabilized the program. It actually increased the funding for the program, and thank you to all the legislatures who worked with us and helped us do that the year before last. I will say in perspective, we're still trying to increase the program, look for other sources of funding. We're constantly working with our national organizations to keep the Department of Energy weatherization program, which is deeply disrespected by the current administration. If they had their druthers, the program would be down the drain in a second. They do not see the value of it at all, and I'm not exaggerating about that. Thanks to a bipartisan coalition in Congress, we've been able to keep that program going, and there is a possibility in some of the debates in the various houses of Congress to actually increase weatherization funding on the national level. But to give you a perspective on how great a state Vermont is in this context, most of the agencies that do the weatherization assistance for low-income households across the country depend primarily, if not exclusively, on the federal Department of Energy funding for their program. And the amount that we get in Vermont is about 15% of our total weatherization program. So 85% or so comes from the state funding that we get. And that is emblematic of the kind of commitment that the state of Vermont has made for decades to support that program, which not only works to reduce the carbon footprint of people in the state, but focuses the benefits on the people who are most in jeopardy of the impact of paying those high fuel prices and the tremendous energy use that they have experienced. So a lot is being done. We continue to work to look for other sources to help us do this. We're looking at programs and developing programs that enable us to install solar arrays in people's homes, or a program now that we're working with a number of groups to look at a community solar program in which low-income people could become subscribers to energy produced by community solar. We're working with thermal heat pumps and other methods to continue to expand the benefits of energy efficiency to low-income households in Vermont, and we'll continue to do that. And we constantly, every day, thank the legislature of Vermont for being so supportive to this effort over so many years.
And the next question has to do with a couple of issues, and I'm going to apologize to the person who submitted this question, because I'm going to read your question and I'm going to add on to it a little more, so my apologies, but I thought it was a good opportunity to get into this discussion. The question says, Efficiency Vermont does great work. Let's empower them and fund them to do more. I know transportation in a rural state is a big contributor to our use of fossil fuels. Can we get one of those self-driving cars to try their tech in a rural state? Maybe create a ride-share program. So, Michael, I wanted to ask you, do you see self-driving cars in Vermont in the future? And also, I know more and more businesses are looking at the carbon footprint of their employees' commute to work. And is that something that you see as an emerging issue? Is that something that Great River looks at as well?
From the self-driving car perspective, I guess the things to point out. One, I think what's fascinating to me about self-driving cars is it's the sort of the first arrival of robotics and artificial intelligence sort of into our lives as citizens of Vermont and around the country and around the world. And so it's not necessarily where we predicted robotics would arrive, but it is where it's arriving. And I think it represents the beginning of a wave of innovation that's going to really transform our society, I guess, from my perspective. And this is really a little bit off topic, but you did ask. So, from my perspective, sort of, we began with the computer, and then we had the smaller computers, and then the invention wasn't either of those, it was actually this network. And now what we're seeing is the emergence of machine learning as really the invention. What its applicability is to social change, to kind of creating this more ethical system, is, I think, the most interesting part of the question. And that's actually kind of, I'm shunting it because for me, that's what's most fascinating, is how can we use learning systems, if you will, systems that can evolve to begin to create conditions for better organizations, better schools, better, more responsive, more efficient environments. And I think that's where the real potential lies. But coming back to the transportation problem, it's something that I guess we agonize with as a company. Clearly the high-tech industry has a arguably lower emissions footprint, carbon footprint than a lot of other of our colleagues, other industries. and yet the transportation to and from work. What's changing that partly is just the nature of how we work together, remote work, less sort of need for transportation, but also the movement in indexing and benchmarking and metrics. So in other words, tipping our hat to B certification here in Vermont or B Labs, for example, that are incentivizing and giving recognition to the sort of the industry leaders that are trying to lower the carbon emission, environmental certifications of all kinds, I think, provide an opportunity to get credibility for that.
Thank you, Michael. The next question I want to address to our legislators on the panel. We have a question saying, I'd like to address the absence of a workforce development system for carpenters who will be key in the construction and renovation of homes that need to meet high performance standards, and wondering if one of the legislators want to talk about workforce training in relation to energy efficiency.
Well, one of the things I remember when I was doing the cap weatherization program is that's what we were doing. Along with actually weatherizing houses, it was in fact a training program. And a lot of those guys remained in the trades. In terms of, I don't know that there's an apprenticeship program. There used to be, but I just simply have not been involved to know whether or not the Labor Department maintains any kind of apprenticeship program. If they don't, they should.
I'll talk about it. I can't really specifically, address carpenters per se. What I can say is that we are working really hard on people in the trades. Use the mic. Oh, sure. We're working really hard
On commerce and economic development, which I've been a member of for 3 years, going on 4 now. We are working really hard to get Vermonters back into the trades. Number one, we have a trade graying problem in terms of our trade people, and a lot of our blue collar people, to use the old terminology, are aging out, and we're going to have a real problem in this state if we don't train them up. So also what's important to note about that is that people in the trades can earn a really good living really quickly with lower cost education. So it's a win-win for Vermont. I know electricians in particular, and construction trades and truck driving and CDL drivers and all this kind of stuff. We're actually trying to get women more involved because women are the highest group in poverty, because we happen to, unfortunately or fortunately, be the ones who have the children. I find it fortunate. What I don't find fortunate is that women end impoverished because they, that was a little. So we are working hard on all of that, and this is a good thing to note, and we should probably work on it this year in terms of, I think it's a great question, and I will note it, and I'll bring it up to my committee, and if anybody, whoever asked that good question, talk to me, and maybe we can work on it together. Thank you.
The next question we have is about both a Brattleboro effort here and also follow-up to the United States pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords. This person writes that there will be a resolution next Tuesday in front of the Brattleboro Select Board to address climate change, basically looking for the town to commit to the greenhouse gas reduction and renewable energy goals contained in the Paris Climate Accord. And the question is, what do your panelists think of this resolution in light of all that is going on in the state and country? I'd like to ask our legislative panel if one of them wants to talk about Vermont efforts, beyond Brattleboro but statewide, to kind of fill that leadership vacuum that has opened up with President Trump's unfortunate decision to pull the United States out of the Accord.
One of the last things we did before we shut off the lights was to pass Representative Mary Sullivan's resolution saying that Vermont remained committed to the principles of the Paris Accord. myself in particular, were worried about the floor fight that was going to happen because of it. And there were, in fact, some, Mary had to deal with some very pointed questions, but she ignored me and went forward, and, you know, more power to her, and she got it passed. I would be more than happy to provide you 31 names of the people who voted against it.
Can I just say one thing about that? Mary Sullivan is the head of the Climate Caucus in the legislature, which over the past 7 or 8 years has grown from about 10 people in the room every Thursday from 12 to 1 to about 75 or standing room only in room 10. So if you ever want to come on up to room 10, Johanna Miller and others, basically Beeper, Danny Barlow, etc., provide pizza, and it's a very lively conversation. Molly and I are always there. We've been there from the start. Okay.
We are really thankful for the legislators who are part of the Climate Caucus, and Representative Stewart's absolutely right. This used to be a much smaller group, and the legislature has put a lot of work into building up its ranks. So one thing you could do is, you know, when you have conversations with your own legislative representatives, ask them if they're a member of the Climate Caucus. If they are not, ask them to consider joining the Climate Caucus and being part of the team that's working to address climate change at the State House. We also have a question here about the social cost of fossil fuels, which they've estimated about $1.30 per gallon on health costs. Who pays it and how do they pay? So I don't know if one of our legislative leaders want to talk about the impact of fossil fuels on public health at all? Representative Dean?
That is not an area of expertise, but your story about your vehicle and your kids, and you know, you're concerned about where the pressure of this is going to land. That's stress. Stress is only helpful in short bursts. In long-term situations, it's debilitating. And so, you know, just from that little bit, that I know it's not good to be under that level of stress. In terms of breathing and whatever, I, as with most of my family, do in fact have asthma, and I can feel the effects. I can tell you when we have a south wind. I don't have to go out of my house. I don't have to look at the trees. I don't have to look at the weather vane. I know whether it's a south wind because it's bringing particulate matter from down country. And it's particularly the second day of the south wind, and my asthma kicks in immediately. So I don't know that what happens here creates the kind of problem. I do know that when we get inversions, you know, mountain valleys have very high particulate matter problems. And for those of you who have an interest, go up to the Agency of Natural Resources, Department of Environmental Conservation, and they'll send you an air quality statement via email every day, so that you just know what the air quality is.
It's not definitive, but it's...
Can I just say, one person to connect with locally is Dr. Rebecca Jones. She is carrying the ball on this locally. I spoke to her recently when I got stuff burned off all of my Irish, French, and Scottish skin because of the sun. And Rebecca Jones is very involved in it locally, and I can't remember the name of the organization, but we had a lot. We had probably 2 to 3 lunchtime speakers this year in the Climate Caucus that talked about things like asthma and all of the societal costs and ills associated with the way we live and with our car-dominated, what do you call it, Molly? Culture. So, Rebecca Jones is doing some, and I talked to her about doing something legislatively with the healthcare committee. I mean, I think I think a lot of people in the legislature are beginning to get that there are health ramifications and therefore cost ramifications of how we live in a, carbon-heavy culture, CO2.
I think this is a perfect example of David's illustration of, point about the myopic view, in that the social impacts and the health impacts are broad and widespread and societal and do affect potentially every household. But if I'm a family struggling in poverty and my only vehicle that I've had for years is an old beater of a truck, I'm lucky if it gets double-digit miles per gallon, and we're living in a house that has an old, decrepit furnace that is belching fumes into the house, but it's not bad enough to warrant, to meet the threshold that our weatherization program could come in and actually repair or typically replace something that old. I've got to deal with that as an individual, and even though I know on a significant level that is adversely affecting myself and my family, I can't stop and think of the broader social impacts of that, because the potential impact on my life and my family of trying to find a way to buy a new car or pay for a new furnace or whatever other impact I need to make, and to change that is impossible. It's not even imaginable for me. And so that's where we were talking about the issue of distress, which is very harmful to us individually. But the people that we're working with who live in poverty live in a constant state of scarcity. And there's a wonderful book and film about that, which highlights what that does to people day in, day out, when you are constantly worried whether you're going to have enough food to put on the table for your children, whether you're going to make the rent payment or be able to buy oil, to make it through that cold snap. That takes an enormous toll, but you can't, because of that, because of the impact of the hierarchy of needs. I can't stop and think, I've got to step away from this and look at it from the 30,000-foot view. I've got to do what I can to survive and make sure my family survives. And that's where the discrepancy comes from, because our policies and our laws don't allow for us as a society to address that kind of need that the real people living in our real world are facing day after day, and what would happen to them if we initiated policies that forced them to do something that was going to be harmful to them individually.
Steve, I think you might be a fortune teller, because literally the next question I was going to ask you was talking about the impact of stress coupled with climate change on low-income Vermonters, so which you just totally answered. So the next question has to do with greenwashing in business. Does everyone know what greenwashing is? Familiar with that term? As this person describes, greenwashing takes place when companies overstate the environmental good of an initiative or overemphasize a green policy, which does little to displace the other negative environmental impacts. I wanted to ask Michael what he thinks about, is greenwashing a problem? How do you confront that in business?
It's a problem on many levels. I think it's a problem both in terms of sort of when I was talking a little bit earlier about certification systems, how sincere are they? How diluted are they? Whose are they? Right? It really matters. But it's also the sincerity. I guess it's become sort of a cliche that your business is in some way helping address environmental or social problems that dilutes the meaning of the work, right? And we've often talked about in our own company, like how do we know that a project is on mission, meaning that it's in our mission of social change or social justice, and And clearly, there's kind of a smell test for us. There's an intuitive sense of okay, this project makes a lot of sense, or this project is rather insincere. It may sound good in a cocktail party, but when you come right down to it, it's not touching people's lives in a meaningful way. So, I mean, I guess we try and wear people out with our sincerity and with the reality of what we're doing. But it is a huge problem that I think I think the indices and the increased transparency in the capitalist system helps to address sort of the marketing rhetoric. And I've also, I mean, in deference to some companies that I work with, I've seen the other side of it, where you don't actually know the amazing work that's going on under the hood. So, this may be a company that we just think of as a stop on the New Jersey Turnpike, and yet the work they're doing behind the scenes to impact people's lives or to address climate change is so real. And sometimes I kind of scratch my head and say, why aren't you telling the world about that? So it does cut both ways, but it's a real issue that there's no easy answer for.
So I would like to jump in on that one because greenwashing has been the topic of conversation at many a family dinner in my extended family. My father being a very conservative Republican business owner, and me being a very liberal, progressive legislator, and also business owner. I'll just
I thought you were going to
disclose
say
that.
lefty.
Yeah. So I have a couple of different business perspectives on the question of internalizing your values. One of them is, this concept of greenwashing is one that we should all be a little bit skeptical of, especially in an era of fake news where you can never be sure what you're actually hearing is true. But I think what you will end up seeing as you start to dig deeper into different companies who are making changes to their business operation, that they're not doing it because they're trying to greenwash you. They're actually doing it because it makes business sense. Okay, so my father's business is Copeland Furniture. They're a small manufacturer. They employ between 80 and 100 people in Vermont. In a time when manufacturing is increasingly moving out of the state and moving even out of the country, Copeland Furniture has been able to survive and to thrive in the Connecticut River Valley. And they're doing it by making really smart business decisions. Some of it outwardly, marketing to their consumers, hey, these are sustainable forest products, which makes business sense for them to do that. But some of it much more internal. What is the biggest expense aside of payroll for a manufacturing facility? It's going to be their energy. And so when a brownfields property opened up next door that was never going to be able to be redeveloped, the business case was made, buy the land and put in a solar field and see if you can net out some of your energy costs. And that made sense for that business. I own a small Main Street cafe, and our biggest expense is electricity as well. And so we started on a shoestring because we're in a small town. We started with secondhand and inefficient equipment. And every time something breaks, we make the decision to buy something that's more efficient. And that just makes business sense. And so I think that increasingly, and Chairman Dean did mention this, many businesses are understanding that it just makes business sense to start looking at your energy use and even self-imposing a carbon price in order to help your business shift into greater efficiencies.
Can I just say, just as a member of the Commerce Committee, we hear repeatedly recruiting businesses to Vermont or getting businesses to locate and or stay here is because of the high energy costs. So I think Sarah's right on, and we know as a state we need to work on that, and it's why having these renewable energy innovators and thinkers, it's really great because that is one of our economic development challenges as the state.
It is 7:30 right now. We are scheduled to go to 8 o'clock. I just want to let folks know that I think we're going to try to wrap up at about quarter of and allow about 15 minutes of time if folks here in the audience want to touch base one-on-one with any of our panelists to discuss these issues in further detail or do a little bit of networking and conversation. And maybe there's even some coffee left in the back of the room. So I mentioned that we asked for questions and also solutions to bring to the legislature. And this was one of my favorite solutions that was submitted. It's all in caps and it just says more bike lanes. So I wanted to see if maybe Representative Burke wanted to address that issue.
Oh, yes, more bike lanes. We do have a challenge, especially in Brattleboro, with biking, anybody who bikes around here. And interestingly enough, Nancy Grouse, owner of Everyone's Books, was just meeting with the Secretary of Transportation today about just biking on Putney Road, which she does regularly. And one of the problems there, well, there's a big project that's planned way out for I forget how many years, big reconstruction, but is that there aren't enough. There's a spot right by the marina where the road just narrows and you can't even put a bike lane there. So we do have challenges, but we do have some great organization here in Brattleboro, Friends of the West River Trail, which have developed the bike trail from Dormiston to Brattleboro and are working on extending that south from the marina down to the old railroad bridge south of the train station over to New Hampshire, and that's Jason Cooper. So there are a lot of people working on the issue of how do you get off-road trails to make it possible to, I rode from the bridge ceremony today up above the marina down to Marlboro Grad School for another meeting and traveled along Putney Road on my bike. And it's, in that place there's a little bit of shoulder, but not a lot of room. So the more that we can also try to consider bike lanes and trails, there's definitely interest in the transportation agency to develop that. There is pretty good money going towards the bike ped program, relatively speaking. And I think the more that a community can advocate for things like that, the way the folks at the West River Trail have done, then we will try to improve our infrastructure here. There's also a group, I'm blanking out of the name, of the Safe Streets Collaborative that's been working on that a lot as well, to try to make things safer for pedestrians and cyclists in Brattleboro.
We've received a few questions and comments tonight about new construction and renewable energy, and specifically wondering if Vermont should have a policy around requiring new building construction to have, for example, solar panels on the roofs, if that's possible. Any of the legislators want to address that issue, or maybe panelists over here?
That's a local choice. I mean, I don't see that being an issue that would, it wouldn't feel appropriate for me as a state legislator to deal with that issue. That's a property owner and that's local zoning. You've got to start with building codes before you bother to do that in terms of having efficient buildings.
So it sounds like if that's something Brattleboro folks are interested, they should tackle it on the local level?
Planning Commission.
Okay, thank you. We've also, in this list of solutions, we've had several people talk about, I think folks maybe know that Vermont has a goal of being 90% renewable by the year 2050, and we've had several questions and comments about that goal, and several folks listed on there as a possible solution that Vermont should take those renewable energy goals and put it into law and commit to a timetable for reducing greenhouse gases. Do any of our legislators want to comment on that?
Boy, I can imagine the fun of that fight. I don't think that I could comment on whether I think that we're going to move in that direction, but I would jump in and say that is exactly why I'm still here having this conversation, because we are not on track to meet our goals. and we need to continue to engage with our neighbors, and our rural neighbors as well as folks who are living right in the middle of town, because we have to continue as a community, as a state, to find new ways to tackle this problem, because unless we really dive into the heating and the transportation sectors, we cannot achieve our goals. And so, that's why we're having these conversations.
And again, not this year, but the year before, Representative Kurt McCormick from Burlington introduced and got passed the Energy Star standards that right now exist in federal statute, which is, given what's happening in Washington, who knows whether or not those standards will continue to exist. He has established them in Vermont statute. So even if they attempt to make them disappear at the federal level, which we fully suspect they will, those standards will continue to exist. And it, as with many things Vermont, it's coupled with a national effort to establish those standards in other states. And I believe California has adopted the Energy Star standards. So, we're going to drive the business, but we will have that standard for the state of Vermont. It's only a partial step towards the 90% by 2050, but it's a step, and it's a necessary step.
And I just want to do one final question before we move on for the evening. We've had several comments about the EV charging stations and electric vehicles and the electric infrastructure that would be needed to increase the number of electric vehicles in the state. And does any of the legislators want to talk about policies that would encourage the installation of more charging stations?
It's been referenced that there was a 3-day conference last week about energy and business and whatever. One of the concluding venues was a meeting at the State House with policymakers, including Green Mountain Power's public relations guy, who served with us in the legislature. They are receiving such strong signals from the private sector, from their compatriots in major industries, that they don't think they can not build more EV charging stations. I mean, it's at least according to Green Mountain Power's guy, the pressure, and it's not like pressure with someone holding a gun to your head. You got to do this. There are economic reasons, and part of it is driven by the renewable portfolio standards that the legislature put in place 2 years ago, that they get credit when they can reduce energy usage in other areas than electric usage. So by having EV charging stations, they reach across into the fossil fuel area, reduce fossil fuel usage, receive a credit for it, and receive money under the RGGI program for having done that, for meeting a renewable portfolio standard. So it's sort of a mix of pressure and incentive. There's real dollars being offered out there for them to do that. So there's strong activity in that area.
Aside from charging stations, I just want to say a little bit about electric vehicles. There's been a great increase in the number in Vermont. And one of the really challenges is that there are some people in the state house who wanted to make registration fees for electric vehicles higher because the electric vehicles don't pay the gas tax. So one of the big challenges coming up is that the gas tax as it is now does not adequately cover our needs for transportation. We've had to raise motor vehicle fees, other things like that. And I think we're going to have to, in the future, start thinking about some kind of a vehicle miles tax, travel tax, or something like that, in order to cover this. And fortunately, the Department of Motor Vehicles decided that there were really not enough electric vehicles at this point to charge extra for the registration. But it's just something to watch because we want to incentivize electric vehicles. And how do we incentivize them? And then there are people who say, well, why should they get an incentive? You know, it's a very complicated issue. So we just want to put that on the radar about that.
So there, you know, I mentioned earlier that part of the challenge that we have is in helping Vermonters see a different way forward. And so this conversation sparks another experience that I had this summer. I had an opportunity to test drive a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, which is basically an electric vehicle that charges its battery through the use of a hydrogen fuel cell. And the New York to Hartford to Boston corridor is experimenting now with hydrogen fueling stations and setting up a network for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So there are other technologies out there in addition to plug-in electric vehicles, and as people continue to, the early adopters continue to push these technologies and try them out and demand infrastructure to support them, I think we're going to have more and more opportunities to spread this to other people going forward. So if you're not an early adopter, go be one.
Thank you very much. And I want to briefly turn the microphone back over to Johanna Miller from the VNRC to talk about next steps. Now that you're all charged and energized to do something about global warming, what you can do when you walk out of this room this evening.
Thank you, Dan, and sincere apologies for turning my back to this esteemed panel of great people with their good ideas.
I wouldn't trust us either.
Okay, never mind. 20 years, fair enough. Okay, so anyway, I just wanted to say that, you know, clearly you lent your time here tonight because you care about this issue in some way or another. I hope that you join us in caring about it enough to continue to lend your time to really make sure that we actually seize this urgent opportunity and turn it into the economic, job-creating, equalizing, and equity opportunity that it actually is. But so my request is bold, which is to say, please continue to show up to help influence the conversation. I actually have we have a handout that I'd love to give to each of you, which outlines a few of the ways that you may continue to participate. Again, just to underscore that the fact that the clean energy sector is the fastest growing sector in the state of Vermont did not happen by accident. It took public support, political will, and good policies to make that happen. But in total, combined, everything the state of Vermont has done will have us falling far short of our comprehensive energy plan and climate goals significantly. So we have a lot to do. So on this handout that I want to hand out, it sort of outlines a few different ways you might continue to engage and has some ideas for some of the policies that we're exploring and would love to explore further with you. But just wanted to underscore again that the governor has put together a diverse climate action commission, and over the course of the next year, that climate commission will be working with legislators and working with you all, I hope, and many other Vermonters in figuring out, well, what the heck are we going to do to actually meet the obligations of the climate accord, as well as our even more ambitious comprehensive energy plan and climate change goals. So it's going to require real hard work and real policies that are commensurate with the challenge. So I wanted to just let you know, and I highlighted it on this handout that I'm going to provide you, that there are 4 public scoping sessions coming up. The last one is in Brattleboro on October 5th, so highly recommend that if you have the time and can lend yet another evening for you to show up. Because as Treasurer Beth Pierce knows, and I'm going to invite the Treasurer just to come up here for a moment, I'm going to turn it over to you in just 1 second, that it really takes, again, a public partnership with our political leaders like the Treasurer, leaders like these lawmakers right here at the table, and many others to do what we need to do. So I want to just say, I'm going to hand this out to everyone, and you have many other ideas. We're going to continue to capture what you lent here to us in terms of the comments and concerns and ideas with legislators and with the Climate Commission. But we need you guys to join us. These guys have really hard work, but this is a partnership of all Vermonters, and really just to underscore that it needs to be solutions that really respond to and bring along the most vulnerable among us, because we need to ensure that everyone can participate in the clean energy transition. So we're committed to that. October 5th at Marlborough College, room 2E at 28 Vernon Street. So I will hand this out while our fabulous treasurer Beth Pierce just give her a moment she came all this way because she wanted to hear from you all about these issues. She's been a real leader in this department, and we need more of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I want to say thank you to VNRC and VBSR and the legislators, because you folks have really made this happen. And our office is supportive of these goals. We've got a program. I'm going to do a couple quick commercials because I think it would be helpful. One is on electric charging stations. We worked with actually an idea that came from our local investment group, and we started getting together and saying, how can we put more money into Vermont? And we've now put $33 million into housing, energy, transportation, municipal infrastructure. We're trying to get some of those areas moving. And one of them, Diane Lamper came in one day. This was an 8 o'clock coffee group, and this is why this is so important. And said, why can't we do some electric charging stations through something called the State Infrastructure Bank over in Vita? So we haven't. We haven't had a lot of pickup on it yet. I'd be interested if someone wants to give it a shot and tell me I'm on the infrastructure board, tell me what's wrong if you're having difficulty with it, but I'd love to see us do more, and it's for private and for nonprofits and government to do. It's 1% loans, which is pretty good rate. So I wanted to point that out. We have some money left in our 10% in Vermont program, which is again putting 10% of our cash back into the local economy. We'd love to do some more housing and energy. We did do a project with VHFA to do energy retrofits and multifamily housing, because you're absolutely right. That's an area that doesn't get a lot of coverage. And we worked with a group down in the Rutland area to do some energy efficiency across the southern parts of Vermont. And they've really targeted folks that normally wouldn't have access to credit. And every one of those folks, by the way, is current on their loans. People really want to do the right thing. We can make it happen. I want to say these are the folks that make it happen. I came to listen today, so I apologize for sort of barging in on this. I did get an apple out of the deal, so I'm really happy. And it's just fabulous. I want to stick around and listen to some of your ideas. We want to work together. You mentioned partnership. It's all about partnership. And I do have my back to them, but all about partnership, and you do a fabulous job, and I'm just thankful for the organizations that are here today, and for our esteemed legislators who care about these issues, and we want to work with you, so thank you very much.
That is a fabulous treasurer.
Self-driving is the most of the solution to some of my driving habits, so hey. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Treasurer Pierce. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I know you're here not only because you care about the environment, but because you recognize that Vermont's future lays in taking care of the environment and working with businesses to ensure that all Vermonters have the economic opportunities before us. So I'd like to thank our legislators, Representative Valerie Stewart, Representative Molly Burke, Representative David Dean, who somehow disappeared in the last 5 seconds, Representative Sarah Copeland-Hanses, and our panelist over here, Michael Knapp with Green River, Steve Geller. Thank you very much, and we look forward. And thank you, Bob Farnham, Bob the Green Guy, who is the wizard behind the curtain, who has been Facebook Living the whole event. Thank you, Bob. So thank you, and the work we have to do is ahead of us. Look forward to working with you on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, George.